Hello, YouTube and fellow Rush fans of the world. My name is Lachlan, and today I'm going to be going through my picks, at least, for what I think are the best and worst songs from each Rush album, all 20 of them. And so it might be a bit of a long video today, but we'll see how I can edit it down. The other thing I'm planning to do is to pick also my favorite song from each album to mix it up a little bit, because I think for a lot of their albums it's possible for there to be like a pretty obvious best and worst song, whereas I think some of my personal favorites may just be a bit of a surprise to some people. So I feel like maybe that can give some differentiation from the other videos like this, just mix things up a little. So just before I get into the full video here, which, you know, if you're interested in skipping this little introduction part of myself, I'll put a timestamp down below where you can skip. But a little bit about myself first. I am a musician. My music journey, in some ways, started with Rush. Pretty much Rush is my favorite band. I take a lot of inspiration from them in the music that I write as well. And so when the news came out that they were getting back together, I was cautiously optimistic. Obviously, replacing Neil is a tough, impossible thing, really, to do. But then after seeing the first few videos to come out from their shows in LA, I was just blown away. Geddy's voice sounds better than it has through, I don't know, like the last 3 live albums they released, at least. Yeah, I was very impressed, and obviously hearing them play 2112 again in its full iteration is unexpected. So I'm really hoping, I've got tickets to see them in December when they come through to Vancouver here in Canada. I'm really hoping that I'll be able to catch the show where they do play 2112, because that is potentially, you know, spoilers, potentially my favorite Rush song. But maybe, I don't know, there's arguments to be made. I sort of grew up listening to Rush. My mom was a Rush fan, and she introduced me to just sort of the hits back in the early 2000s. I think the first song I heard was Fly By Night, which my sister and I both loved. And then from there we heard, you know, Limelight, Tom Sawyer, Free Will I really latched onto, and that became my favorite song for a long time as a kid. Yeah, I just sort of expanded listening to them. I just kept downloading albums back in the days of LimeWire, you know, one song at a time. And yeah, before I knew it, I had a favorite band who has yet to be surpassed, I think. They're probably the most unique band that I know of, where they can change their sound so many times throughout their career, but still remain Rush without any lineup changes, without any commercial sellout points, anything like that you would expect from a, you know, 50-year-long career. And then that led me down the path of becoming a musician myself. I'm a bass player for Paridalon, the band that this channel belongs to. And we just released our second album in September last year, which, you know, have this very lovely one-of-a-kind record here. There I am. If you like Rush, which I assume you do because you're watching this video, maybe you'll like some of the stuff that we have to give. We spent a lot of time on that album, and it would really mean the world to me and the rest of the guys and gals in the band if you gave it a chance. So you can find the links to that in our description as well if you're interested. So without any further ado, let's go to the first album, Rush, released way back, long before I was born. I think most people would say they like this album, but I don't think anyone loves this album. Maybe some people do. I definitely would rank it sort of near the bottom of my Rush tier if I were to make one. It's very raw, it's very earnest, and I really enjoy that. And I don't think there's any songs on here that I actually dislike, so putting it on and being able to listen to it without, you know, as a record, difficult to skip, it's great. And I think that actually carries through to most of the Rush albums that we will talk about going forward here, up to a point, which I'll get to, that like there isn't really a bad song on the majority of their albums. So when I say like I'm gonna pick the worst song, my least favorite song on the record, you know, like a little asterisk beside that, just they're still great songs. I just think maybe they're the weakest ones on the album, or the ones that speak to me the least. So for this one, I think best song is probably the obvious pick. I think it has to be Working Man. The heaviness of it, really, for the time, and the really nice, memorable riff, cool jam section, 7 minutes long, so, you know, like a little bit of a flavor of the prog that was to come, but not really there yet. Pretty much just straight up hard rock, maybe even like proto heavy metal. But yeah, I think Working Man is easily, if you were to pick one song to represent this album, is Working Man. I think that's the obvious choice. My favorite song, though, personally, that's another thing. I recently, sparking this video, after seeing the new Rush footage from their live shows, I did a listen through of their entire discography from the beginning to the end, all of the studio albums, the EP, the live albums, everything. Fresh ears. I've just heard all this stuff again. So I think after re-listening, my favorite song on here has to be Here Again, which also happens to be the longest track on the album, which, may be theme. I think a lot of us progressive rock enjoyers tend to appreciate the longer songs. Really slow, sort of gloomy, almost Black Sabbath-esque bluesy song, and I think it's really different from everything else that's on the album, so it kind of stands out to me in that way. Worst song on this album, not musically. I think musically everything on here is pretty much on par. But lyrically, I don't think In the Mood holds up very well. The lyrics are, at best, just very cheesy and predictable. And at worst, you've got that line that's like, "Hey baby, it's 7:45. The hour is late." And it's bad. I mean, obviously, if you know the history of this album, how John Rutsey, the drummer on the first record, wrote the lyrics originally and then kind of had like a bit of a anxiety freak out and destroyed them all. And then Geddy had to write the whole album in the studio, the lyrics for it. It kind of makes sense that some of the lyrics would be pretty subpar. Geddy has written a few other songs and his solo material, which all stands up a lot better, I think. But yeah, that's it for their debut album. Next up, I will go over Fly By Night. As I said, the first Rush song that I heard is the title track for this album. Going into this, was younger, hearing it for the first time. Obviously, the first song I heard that got me into Rush was from this album. I was really expecting to love this. And I do like it. I like it quite a bit, but I don't love it, I think. I think it's a transitory record. It doesn't quite do the hard rock, just jammy tunes thing as well as the first album did. And it doesn't do the progressive rock, more advanced songwriting as well as the next album, or any of the albums after. So it's an odd one. Best song, the one that sort of encapsulates this album, probably Anthem. It hits you right off the bat. It's the first thing you hear from the record, and it's just immediately very different from the previous album. It still has that hard rock vibe. It's still a 4-ish minute song, but it hits hard. The drums, now that Neil Peart is here on this album, the drums just blow you away right off the bat, and the lyrics are noticeably a step above what they were before. I think Neil will write better lyrics on the further albums, but here, he's getting rolling, and he's immediately just a step above what Geddy was able to write for the first record. And yeah, I think Anthem, if you were to show someone that, it gives them a pretty good idea of sort of the prog side, sort of the heavy rock side that they could expect from this album. The worst song, I think, would have to be, in my opinion, no contest, it has to be Rivendell. I want to like this song. It was another one that Geddy wrote, and I think the lyrics are actually pretty decent. They're nothing crazy, but I do love a good Lord of the Rings themed track. I don't think musically there's much interesting going on, and I think vocally, Geddy's performance is not great. It just feels kind of wispy. I don't know. The notes they're not wrong, but he's not sitting on them very well. It feels just sort of irritating to me to listen to. I did like it a little bit more on this last listen through. I did, but yeah, still not great. And it's very long for a song that is just so simple. It just kind of keeps going, and you're like, is this gonna move on soon? So yeah, that's my pick for best and worst. But my personal favorite on here, I think I have to go with Fly By Night. Yeah, I mean, I've just gone over my history with it, but I think it was a really great example of how Rush is able to craft these, on the surface, straightforward pop songs that are just really catchy, and you can just enjoy them, hearing them on the radio. You have no idea who the song is by. You have no idea what the lyrics are. They're just good tracks to listen to. But then you dig a little deeper and you hear the crazy bass playing that is on this song, or the really inventive guitar chords, some interesting timing choices here and there, Geddy's voice is like reaching its peak, I think, on this song. And the lyrics really tell a story, which is something that Neil Peart was very good at doing for a long time, which we'll get into later, maybe on some of the later albums, how that maybe falters a little bit. But yeah, I think Fly By Night is my personal favorite on here. Next up is Caress of Steel, their third record. Came out the same year as Fly By Night, which is pretty crazy these days. I mean, it took my band 8 years to do our second album, and these guys just pump one out in a few months. And I loved this album. I know a lot of people don't. I know it was very poorly received when it came out. It does definitely feel disjointed at times. It feels kind of cold, the production on it. It doesn't have as much like life and enthusiasm as the previous two records, but it's crafted very well, I think. The two long tracks on here, both are excellent. I do wish maybe that they flowed a little nicer between the sections rather than just sort of abruptly stopping, which they improve on later. But really, I think they stand up with some of the best that Rush did through their career. And I wish more people gave this album a little bit more credit, because it's, in my opinion, pretty impressive. Even the shorter songs, I think, are really good. Like, I Think I'm Going Bald is a very silly song, obviously. The lyrics are just kind of, tongue-in-cheek. A bit of a glimpse of the sense of humor that Rush displays sometimes in their recordings, but usually live. But it's great. I don't think I, again, dislike any songs on this album. I would say I think the best song on here, and my favorite, has to be The Fountain of Lamneth. Yeah, I think, although it is a little choppy, a little disjointed, some of their best riffs that they've ever come up with are on that song. And the whole atmosphere of it, the storytelling of it, it's excellent. It almost sounds like something Yes might do if they were a little heavier. I think the worst track on here is probably I Think I'm Going Bald, just because it's a little less serious. It's short. There's nothing crazy musically intense that happens during it, but I do think it's a very fun song, and I don't at all think it's bad. Next up, we have the GOAT, as the kids say. 2112. For a long time, my favorite Rush album. I think for a lot of people, their favorite Rush album. Also, their like big breakout album, really, after almost calling it quits on the previous record when it performed so poorly. The record label pressuring them to do something more commercial, more like their first album, and they were like, you know what, let's go out with a bang and do another 20-minute song, and we're just gonna really go for it. And the whole concept of the thing, the story of it, it's a little hokey with the whole, like, music can save the world kind of thing, but also a genuine point. Like, what is the purpose of our time here on Earth, if not to make art or appreciate art and connect with each other in that way? I think the hokiness aside, it still holds up in that sense. Favorite song and best song has to be 2112. I don't think there can be any other answer. Worst song on here, again, I don't think any of the songs on here are even close to being mediocre. I love the whole thing. If I had to pick one that I don't love as much, I don't think I could, but if I had to, it would probably be Twilight Zone. There's nothing wrong with it. I can't even say why I would pick it for the worst one. It just maybe doesn't have quite as much energy as the other ones do. I know a lot of people don't like Tears from this album, which is, I believe, another one that Geddy wrote the lyrics for. But I really love it. It's also one of Rush's very few songs that have a mellotron in it, which I'm a huge sucker for. You'll hear all over our music. So, yeah, I think Tears is a great song, and I would have to pick Twilight Zone as being just a hair subpar the others. Next, we have a contender for my favorite Rush album, A Farewell to Kings. I know a lot of people feel their next album, which we will obviously talk about in a minute here, is the peak of their sort of prog powers, but I think this was their peak. I think this is a literally flawless album, and I love the production of it. I love the lyrics. I love the songwriting. I like how it sort of brings back a little bit of the disjointed, chaotic mess that was Caress of Steel, but like more polished and more focused. But the chaos is still there, especially on like the last track, Cygnus X1. What a weird song. So I would say I think the best song on here probably would still have to go with Xanadu. I think it's a good example of a long form song that does flow very nicely. Builds up, you get halfway through the song, there's still no lyrics yet, and then they kick in and they're really punchy, really powerful, tells a great story that you can just kind of like perfectly envision while they sing about it. But my favorite song, it's tied between Cygnus X1 and A Farewell to Kings, but I think for the purposes of this I'd have to go with Farewell to Kings, simply because it influenced my songwriting so much, especially that middle section with the off time cool little bass riff that happens. I've used that as inspiration for quite a few things that I've done. But again, they're all pretty much on par, so it's kind of hard to pick. The whole album is my favorite. But the least favorite, I think, would have to be Madrigal. Again, for no real reason other than it lacks a bit of the energy of the other songs. But I think in the context of the album, that's perfect. You need a bit of a rest before Cygnus X1 kicks in and makes you very uncomfortable with its weirdness. So next we have Hemispheres, which, as I mentioned before, a lot of people consider to be the peak of their sort of 70s prog era. I also happen to have the very cool Canadian exclusive red vinyl version from the 70s, which, you know, when I got it wasn't a huge deal. Records weren't really big at the time. And I got it, I think, for like $15 from a local record shop. But nowadays, these go for quite a hefty sum I've seen in some local record stores. So I'm glad I managed to snag that. Best song on this, I think, is gonna surprise people. In my opinion, I think Circumstances is their best song from this record. It's concise. It encapsulates the whole sound of the album in one track. And I think potentially could be the hardest song to play on bass that Rush have done, with the exception of maybe one or two other songs later in their career, which I'll probably hopefully remember to mention. My favorite one has to go to probably Hemispheres. It's such a journey, but it is my least favorite of their 3 20-minute songs, which is not saying much because all 3 of them are incredible, but I think a lot of people might be surprised that I would rank The Fountain of Lamnath over Hemispheres. And I think while Hemispheres glues everything together more and is a much more cohesive listening experience with a much more metaphorical, more interesting story, I think Fountain of Lamnath is much more aggressive and much more ear-catching to me, whereas Hemispheres maybe feels sometimes like it kind of melds together a little too much. But again, not really a criticism, just a comparison of the different styles of the 2 tracks. The worst song on here, and again, I use worst as barely its definition, would be, I think, La Via Strangiato, which again, probably a hot take, but I love vocals in long prog tracks. I find my attention wandering a little bit when we've got a really long instrumental going on. That's it, really. I think musically, the whole album is on par. I couldn't really pick one better than the other. But it also does bug me slightly that they sampled that old film piece. Not for any real reason, just I'm not a huge fan of samples or musical references that are completely ripped off from something else. I would rather hear original music. Again, it's such a small section of the song, and it's fun, so I don't really hold it against it, but just very minuscule reasons why it ends up being my least favorite on the album. Next up, we have Permanent Waves, the other contender for my favorite Rush album. Depending on my mood, it really switches between this one and A Farewell to Kings. I think this is where music proficiency, musical skill, and their songwriting skill melded perfectly to create I think this is actually one of the shortest Rush albums, very concise, but still really proggy, really creative, perfect hybrid album from what they were up until this point to what they were going to become soon. And yeah, I really like the production on it as well. I think it has a really nice, clear sort of sheen to it that melds everything together but doesn't obscure anything. And it sounds full, it sounds rich. My favorite song on here would have to be Natural Science, I think. Ever since I first heard it, when I was listening through their discography the first time, it really jumped out at me. And just like the aggressive riffs, the, again, cool storytelling, metaphors for life that they've got woven in. So great. I would love to cover it one day if I could make that work with our band. Best song, I would say, is probably Free Will. I think that, again, like for some of the other ones, sums up the whole album. You could show that song to someone, and if they don't like that song, they're probably not going to like the rest of the album. And it's also one of the last times we hear Geddy's full out like screech voice that he would use on their earlier albums. I'm surprised, like they played this one recently in LA as well, and he can still hit those notes. It seems like he's been taking vocal lessons, vocal coaching again, and it's pretty impressive how much of a change his voice has gone through, especially for the age that they are now. Worst song on here, I think, has to be Entre Nous, but only because this is something I'll get into later, but I think at a point Neil's lyric writing stopped flowing quite as nicely, and I don't know if that was the lyrics he was writing or Geddy interpreting them into their songs that caused that, but I find sometimes that the lyrics just, they lack a strong enough melody to really carry the difficult syllables and rhythmic placement. And I have a very hard time articulating what I mean by this, but it's just always something that's bugged me, and it at a point it kind of takes over, and I'll get into that as we go. But I think Entre Nous is the first song in their discography where I noticed a little bit of that, just a few lines here and there that I just don't think flow as nicely as they could, but it's not anything even close to being an issue. Like, I still love that song, and I love this whole album, and nothing else on the album demonstrates that. I think it's just a couple lines in that song that feel slightly clumsy to me in comparison to everything they've done before. Okay, now we go to the big boy, Moving Pictures. Generally considered universally to be their best album. Personally, I would disagree with that, not to, be contrarian or anything, but I think this would be somewhere like middle of the pack for my favorite Rush albums if I were to rank them. It just has the sheen, the sort of like clear, smooth production that the previous album had, I think takes over a little bit on this album, and everything just sort of sounds kind of glazed over with shimmer. I don't really know how to describe it. I obviously still like solid, nearly flawless album. It's tough when you're ranking Rush albums. They're all so good, right? Like, is this really worse than the last album? It's hard to say. But when I listen to it, I just don't feel quite as attached to it as I do to the previous few. And that could also be because like half this album was hit singles, and I heard them all growing up, so it wasn't quite as new to me when I did eventually listen. But again, no bad songs. The worst one on here, I would say, is probably Vital Signs. Just in comparison to everything else, maybe sticks out a little bit. It's the first taste, I guess, aside from a little bit of Spirit of Radio, of their sort of reggae incorporation. I love it. I know some people think that the last two songs on here, Witch Hunt and Vital Signs, are kind of a step down from the rest of the album, but I don't really agree. I think they're all great. It's just, for the purposes of this video, I have to pick one. The best song category, like thinking as objectively as I can about a record like this, it would probably have to be Limelight, I think. Another like really punchy, really straight to the point pop song, pop rock. But then, like, weird time signatures, really great bass playing, really great solo, metaphorical lyrics that kind of make you think, give you an insight into sort of Neil's peace of mind. And it's just a really interesting song that I don't get sick of even after all these years. I think it was maybe the second or third Rush song I ever heard, and it still holds up. I still enjoy it. But my favorite on this album, I think, I would have said, a couple years ago that it was The Camera Eye. Or Red Barchetta, depending on my mood. But recently, during this whole discography re-listening, Witch Hunt really stood out to me. Like, I didn't fully notice before how foreboding and creepy it was. And I think part of what really brought that out was hearing it on the Grace Under Pressure live DVD, where the synthesizers are a lot more prominent and they add a lot more atmosphere to it. So that being the middle of their synth era. And I think it really benefits from that. So maybe it's unfair to pick because the production that it's given on this record, I don't think quite does it justice. Just the atmosphere isn't fully realized. But it's still a great song with some really great lines like quick to judge, quick to anger, slow to understand, ignorance, prejudice, and fear walk hand in hand. Poetry right there, and always relevant. But yeah, I think it does better as a song from that live recording. So if you haven't heard that, maybe go check that out from the Grace Under Pressure live DVD. It's really something, and it really gave me a new appreciation for that song. So that marks the end, I guess, of their like progressive rock era where they were using Yes and Genesis as their main inspiration. They started taking inspiration from more modern bands of the time, moving into the 80s, the new wave bands where reggae was a big influence, synthesizers taking over everything, which I know, hot topic for a lot of people. They're like, I want my guitars, I want my three-piece rock band, but I love the synthesizers. And I will just say 80s era Rush is, for me, on par with 70s era Rush. I don't think the 80s era is quite as consistent, but I think the peaks are higher for sure, in my opinion. So that brings us to the first record of this period, at least how I consider it, this pretty drastic sonic change from Moving Pictures. Signals. At one point, I would have potentially considered my favorite Rush album, but during this re-listen, I maybe found a few more cracks in the armor than for the previous stuff and some of the following stuff. So I don't think I would rank it quite as high anymore, but still very high. I think Subdivisions is easily the best song on this album. It encapsulates what they were trying to do. Getty jumping between the synths and the bass so flawlessly and consistently through the song. The lyrics really stand out to me. I think it's just a perfect song, and I've covered it with our band before, and it was really hard to play. Really fun. It holds a special place in my heart, even for that reason. But I think that has to be the best song on here, the one that you would show someone to show them what this album is all about. The worst song, maybe again a hot take, not sure really what people's opinions are. This album doesn't get discussed as much, along with a lot of the other 80s ones. So I don't see a lot of discourse around them online. But I think the worst song on this, by a fair margin, is Countdown. And I think this is another example of the lyrics not quite fusing with the music in the way that they always had previously. Just a little meandering, like they weren't really sure what melody they wanted to give it. Again, not a bad song. I love listening to it. It's really cool, the concept of, explaining the launch and the excitement behind it. But I just think that, especially for the last song on the album, it's kind of a bit of a letdown from everything that you've just heard the other 7 songs before it. Yeah, it always leaves me feeling slightly disappointed every time I listen to this album. I wish that the track listing was reversed, which brings me to my favorite song, I think, which is Losing It, which I think should have been the last song on the album. It's such a beautiful, melancholic, sweeping song. Lots of time changes, lots of interest, really strong vocal melody, and the lyrics are just so heartbreaking and so well done. I think it would have hit a lot harder had it been the last song and Countdown been right before it. Next up brings potentially one of the most divisive albums in Rush's catalog, I think. Grace Under Pressure. This was like 1984, I believe. So like you're in the middle of the synth revolution, basically. And this album comes out. All shorter songs, all mostly pretty straightforward. There are definitely still Rush's signature time changes and rhythm changes and quirky lyric, everything. It's all still here. There's still Rush, which is something that I really admire about this band, is how they can keep their core sound intact while they so drastically change their veneer. But I've heard a lot of people really don't like this album. I heard Mike Portnoy from Dream Theater say that this album is kind of where he fell off listening to Rush, which personally boggles my mind, because had we done this video a year ago, before I did this re-listen, I would have picked this as my favorite Rush album. I think it is another flawless one, and I think it's a step up from Signals. In a lot of ways, it's maybe not creatively a step up, because Signals took a lot of risks and did a lot of new things that they hadn't done before, whereas this, I think, perfects on what they were doing with Signals. No bad songs on this album to my ears, and I think their catchiness never was more apparent and would never be more apparent again. Like, every song on this album is just so sing-alongable, and you've got so many great songs. I think the best song on here, in my opinion, is Red Sector A, and that's the one that I would show anyone interested in this album as a taste, because it's got that sort of very interesting feel change. It's mostly synthesizers. I don't think Geddy plays any bass on that track, and it is very atmospheric, kind of foreboding. The lyrics are really great, straightforward, but the storytelling is still there. And I don't think there's really any songs on this album that suffer from the lyrical mismatch that I was talking about on the couple of the other albums, except for maybe Kid Gloves, but it's a stretch. I think it still works. So then I think the worst song on here, in my opinion, is Kid Gloves. Again, nothing wrong with it. It's a great song. I just don't enjoy it quite as much as the rest of them, and I find myself just wanting to hear the next two songs every time I listen to it, which brings me to my favorite song, which is Between the Wheels, which again I think is a divisive choice. I know a lot of people really don't like that song from what I've seen, but I think it's a beautiful song. The synthesizers are so heavy, so thick, and it just has such a driving rhythm, and the guitar playing from Alex Lifeson I think really stands out. In this era, he tends to get lost a little bit, or he just does really atmospheric things that you can't always hear, but I think on Between the Wheels he really stands out, and you hear the really like looming chords that he's playing that really set the tone for the song. Next up we have Power Windows, one of their more interesting album covers for sure. Now this album is a little bit weird for me because I think in terms of the songwriting it's pretty much on par with everything that came before it, but in terms of the production I think this is a massive step down. I didn't really talk about it at all, but up until Signals, or including Signals, they had one producer, Terry Brown, who did all of their stuff, and he was pretty consistent. His stuff always sounded good. And then Grace Under Pressure was the first album he didn't do. It sounded a little thinner, a little more synth heavy, a little more atmospheric, but I think it really works for the sound of that album. And I know they did a reissue recently where Terry Brown did remix it, and I personally think it sounds terrible. I don't enjoy it at all. The synths are way too quiet, the guitars are way too loud, and it takes away the whole atmosphere of the record. So then on this one, another producer, again, and the production gets even thinner. Everything sounds very high-end, very punchy, and the bass tone very poppy. Not poppy like the genre, but like slapping and popping and aggressive. Still some of Geddy Lee's best bass playing on this record, I think, but just the sound of it is very thin and lacks any kind of body to it, which to a point was done for the vinyl format. If you listen to this on a proper record player with a good stereo system, I think it does sound very good. But in the digital age, when you bring these albums with this style of production to like a more high fidelity digital stereo system or headphones or anything like that streaming, it just sounds thin and wimpy, and I think it really needs a proper remix, just for the low end really. Best song on here that sort of encapsulates it is Marathon. Super catchy, one of the longer, I think maybe the longest song, I can't remember, they don't have the times printed on the back. One of the longer songs at least, and a lot of key changes, a lot of very interesting bass playing, lots of different style. Like it sounds, I know he doesn't, but it sounds like Geddy is playing slap bass, just with the way his bass sounds and the way his fingers are very aggressively pluck at it, which is just a unique sound for Rush that we haven't really heard much of before. The worst song on here ties in again to that sort of lyrical misfit syndrome that I was talking about. It starts to rear its head more on this album, I think. The choruses of these songs are all really strong, and I think the verses where Geddy brings his register down and he starts doing this sort of like, not spoken word, he's still singing, but it's like a lot of lower register, more conversational singing, and it feels a lot less directional. Like he didn't really know how to develop the melody for the lyrics, or that the lyrics were not written to the song, they were shoved into the song where they needed to fit. Again, I don't think it's a huge problem yet. This album is still incredibly enjoyable and has a lot of some of their best songs on it. but it does start to pop up here and there where you notice it a lot more, whereas on the other albums maybe it was one song that felt a little off, whereas this one it happens fairly frequently to me. But yeah, I think Marathon doesn't have that, and it's a very strong song. The worst one for that, probably Grand Designs. Again, I don't dislike any of the songs on this album, but I think Grand Designs holds my attention the least. Like, the big money starting the album off is very bombastic, very ear-catching, and then Grand Designs just kind of is there afterwards. And I think if you listen to it on its own, you're like, yeah, this is a great song. But if you listen to it on the album with everything else, it kind of falls short. But then my favorite one, I don't know how many people have this opinion, but I think Middletown Dreams is my favorite. It's sort of a bit of a return to their earlier style of lyric writing where they just told a story. A lot of, which I guess I haven't really touched on, a lot of these era of albums start to get more personal, more political, and I do like that stuff. But I think Neil has a harder time, at least I can't ask him because unfortunately he's no longer alive. But I think he seems to have a harder time coming up with rhymes or smooth sentences when he's writing more personally. Like, the ideas and the feelings overtake the musicality sometimes, it feels like. Whereas when he sticks more to stories and writing from the perspective of a character, I think it's always through their discography sounds better to me. I think Middletown Dreams does that really well, just from the perspective of people in a small town living their big dreams and trying to find ways out that just don't work. And then the beautiful second verse with that little synth pattern that goes on and Geddy's very emotionally charged vocals, I think it, for me, is easily my favorite track on the record. But it did take a few years for me to develop that opinion. It wasn't an immediate standout. So I think maybe if you don't agree with me, try re-listening to it and just like sit with it for a little while. Maybe it won't be your favorite, but you might learn to appreciate it a little more. Now, next we have Hold Your Fire. Nearing the end of their 80s period, their synth-heavy period, probably their most synth-heavy album. The synthesizers kind of take over on this one. And I think this is the first album in their discography where the severe cracks start to appear. Again, I don't think Rush have a bad album. In comparison, just the bar is set so high by all those albums that we just talked about. I think this one, by a good margin, falls short. And I think the lyric writing issues that I was talking about earlier, being more personal and less well crafted, really are apparent on almost every song from this album. Again, the choruses tend to be stronger. Especially, I used to actually like this more, and on my last re-listen, I found myself slightly disappointed with it. It does have some very high highs, which we'll get to, but it has a lot of lows too. And again, I don't think any of the songs are bad. I think they're all enjoyable, just paling in comparison to everything that came before, basically. So I would say the best song on here is Time Stands Still. I guess it was the single for a reason. It sums up the sound of the album yet again. They're very good at doing that. They just have these songs that kind of encapsulate everything they're trying to do on that recording. And the guest vocals add a lot to it, something we've never really had in Rush before or since. And it was really cool hearing them play it live again, having Amy Mann join them on stage for the first time in all those years. It seems crazy that never happened before, but I think it's a very strong song, very earwormy, and you could just sing along, get it stuck in your head all day, while still having a lot of really interesting musicality going on. I think the worst song on this album is High Water for me. It's a tie between High Water and Lock and Key. I think neither of them have very many catchy moments, and they don't have a lot of musically interesting moments either. It's kind of like a by the numbers song for this era. You could listen to other songs on this album, you could listen to other songs from the previous 3 albums, and hear everything that those 2 songs have to offer, but better. But High Water ends the album, and it's just kind of it's another disappointing ending, just like on Signals, where you've listened through this admittedly much more flawed but enjoyable experience, and then you get to the end and just kind of like whimpers out a little bit. My favorite song on here is no contest again, Mission. I think it's interesting in that it is probably the most saccharine, cheesy, gooey sounding song that Rush have done. Like, almost just entirely pop, very hook ridden and focused, and that like 80s twinkly synthesizer sound that goes through the whole thing. Kind of reminds me of like something Michael Jackson might do. And then the middle section hits you and it all of a sudden just becomes like we're in the 70s again, and you've got these crazy sounds going on, time changes everywhere, and it doesn't last very long, but it's really interesting, and they haven't done anything like that for at least 3 albums before this. And it just stands out immediately, like, whoa, there's Rush again, yeah. So now we get into sort of an interesting era of Rush, where people don't really talk about it that much. This Presto, I think, the most forgotten Rush album. I never see it top any charts of anyone's favorite, or their least favorite, or just no one talks about it. It might as well not exist from what I see in the Rush world. Even the band themselves rarely play songs from it. It's a good album. It's a lot better than Hold Your Fire, and they really toned down the synthesizer overuse on this. They're still there. It's still an 80s album, and it sounds like an 80s album. And the production, I think, is actually the worst one. Maybe Hold Your Fire might be worse, but it's pretty bad. It's very thin, very lifeless. But I think, again, Geddy's bass playing on all of these 80s albums is just stellar. And if you are a fan of just bass as an instrument in general, I don't see how you could dislike any of these albums. He's so good. But this one has a lot of great songs. I think the songwriting is a lot stronger and more memorable than on Hold Your Fire. And it's really a shame that people don't listen to it more, or it like doesn't, I think there was maybe some fatigue of this sound that Rush had at the time. This was 89, so like the 80s were kind of dying, and I think people were just maybe sick of the synthesizers and that really twinkly, perfect sounding sheen that all the music had back then. But I think this really is a surprising album coming off of the heels of the last one and going into the next one. I think it's better than both of them. And the best song on here, I would say it would have to be Show Don't Tell, kind of the obvious pick, being the album opener. Just hits you in the face. And after getting so used to the synthesizers on the previous 2 albums, the guitar is a lot bigger of a focus here. Hearing those guitars at the beginning just like slam you in the face, a really cool riff start the song off. I mean, we haven't heard that in like a decade almost from Rush. I think it's a great example of how this album is a little different from what came before. It's a good spokesperson for the record. Worst song on here is probably Hand Over Fist. I think it's really repetitive. It's kind of annoying, actually. Again, I don't dislike it if I'm in the mood and I'm listening to the whole album. It has some enjoyment that it gives me, but just they repeat the chorus a lot. It's not got anything super striking about it. Nothing really jumps out. It's kind of, you know, near the end of the album. Nothing that it does is different from what we've heard before in the rest of the album. I would also say that this album improves lyrically a little bit, but there are still some songs like Warpaint and even parts of The Pass, as much as I love that song, that don't flow very well lyrically, in my opinion. My favorite song from here would be Available Light, which I also heard Mike Portnoy talking about this on a video recently. He chose that song as well, which I've never really heard anyone talk about before, but it's a beautiful song. Some of Geddy's best vocals, and one of the most like just pleasant choruses to listen to, I think. Nice way to end the album, in contrast to a few of the other 80s albums we talked about. With the song before, Hand Over Fist, you start getting kind of tired with it. You're like, okay, whatever. And then Available Light just comes in and shoots new energy into it and leaves you on a really good note, which is sometimes very needed. So that brings us to the end of the 80s and into the 90s, which I think is my least favorite period of Rush. I don't think any of these albums are bad, but the one we're going to talk about next, Roll the Bones, I think is their worst album. I have seen some people say that it's their worst. Sorry, it's a CD. I don't have this one on record. There's a few of the newer ones that I don't have on record that I'll have to replace with CDs. But this album maintains everything I thought was wrong with some of the previous albums. The lyric writing is the most clumsy on this record. The synths are still there, but they don't take a focus. The guitar is more prominent, but it still doesn't do anything super interesting. And Geddy's voice is almost always lower register. He's kind of like talking his way through the songs. Again, he is still singing, but it's much mellower. There's no highs, there's no lows. It's just kind of flat the whole way through. The production is also, same as the last 2 albums, very thin. And I think that this was like the death knell in their current sound of the 80s, where they didn't really know what to do next, but they knew they couldn't do what they did before, so they kind of just meandered. And it sounds like it. I ask them, because, hey guys, why is this your worst album? And maybe, I know some people do really like this album, and I know even like songs like Bravado are very popular even for the band themselves to play, but I don't enjoy it that much. I'll put it on, I'll listen to it, it's great like background music, it's still Rush, has all the elements I enjoy, but nothing stands out. It's just, with the exception of a couple songs. So I think the best song on this album is Where's My Thing, the instrumental one, because it doesn't have the meandering vocals or the sort of smooshed in lyrics that have rhyming issues sometimes. It's just Rush being Rush, and they play as well as ever. Very fun song. I also love that the secondary title is Part 4, Gangster of Boats Trilogy. It's just funny. Another little sense of humor. Yeah, I think that's the best song, and one that I would show someone from this album to be like, yeah, this is what they were capable of in this era. And then the worst one on here has to be Ghost of a Chance for me. I am not the kind of person who usually dislikes the more ballady, the more sappy type songs. I'm usually a big fan of that as long as they nail it. But I think Ghost of a Chance, the lyrics really let it down, and the melody really lets it down. The chorus salvages it a little bit, but it's just not, it's not catchy. And a song like that, where there's not much else happening, and it's relying mostly on the lyrics and the emotion of the song to carry you through, I don't think it's executed very well. So that brings me to my favorite one, which is The Big Wheel, which is also interesting. I think the verses are kind of forgettable, like most of the album. And then the chorus hits, and it's just almost like Mission from Hold Your Fire. Very, very poppy, very melodic, very catchy, out of nowhere, and there's nothing else like it on this record. Just for the sheer novelty of it, I already pay more attention to it, but I do love a good catchy hook, especially in progressive rock music, when there's a lot of other stuff going on. So that's Roll the Bones for me. Then that brings us to Counterparts, which I think is a huge step up from Roll the Bones, the highlight of their 90s period, which is only 3 albums, so like it's not a huge period, but I think that it corrects a lot of the musical interest that was lacking from Roll the Bones, brings it back here. The songs instrumentally are all very interesting. They've all got a lot going on, except for like song like Animate, which is a lot simpler, but still like ear-catching. It does still suffer a lot from that same thing, like the lack of a focused melody, the lack of a lot of the lyrics feeling like they're just kind of wedged in there, but it also has a lot of stronger moments too that Roll the Bones doesn't have. So I think the best song on here, to sum it up, is still Animate. Kicks right off, it sums it up. The lyrics, there's not a lot of them, like they're pretty sparse throughout the song. It's not like they're cramming a lot of words in, so I feel like although the melody isn't as strong, there's not a lot of words to let that down in the first place. Probably the one that I would put on a compilation included from this album. The worst song on here is tough, because musically, I think The Speed of Love is the worst song. Not very interesting. Chorus is kind of irritating. But Alien Shore exists, which I think potentially has their worst lyrics ever. They're so blunt and so bland. Like, it's just, the sentiment of the song is really nice, talking about, like, ties into the title of the album very nicely, Counterparts, how certain things complement each other, how certain things, you know, rub against each other to create friction, whether that's like differences in sex or religion or race. But it's just so upfront about those things, and just like, there's no metaphor, there's no story, it's just like, huh, and I don't think it's good. I think it's very clumsy lyrically, the melody doesn't hold up, but instrumentally I think it's a much better song than The Speed of Love. So it's kind of tied between those two. I can't really pick. And then my favorite one on here, I think I would pick Everyday Glory. Another song I don't hear people talk about much. It's at the end of the album. I think a lot of people sort of just got fatigued from this record after a lot of the really strong, sort of punchy, in-your-face songs at the beginning, and it kind of mellows out as it goes. But Everyday Glory, I think, does a decent job of the storytelling aspect. Again, it has a point that it's trying to make. It has some metaphor built in a little bit. And I think the chorus is very musical and very catchy, like not a lot from this era is. So next up, I do have this one on record, on vinyl. This is Test for Echo. I love the cover art on this. I think this is my favorite Rush album cover. It's very Canadian too, with the native Inukshuk here and the wintry landscape. It just, like, you know, screams Northern Canada. And I think this album has a very like peak, low listening experience. It starts off pretty strong, the song Test for Echo, and then it really, like, every couple songs I'm like, this is kind of like the previous two albums, or previous three albums, whatever it was, where they've got like less focus on the melody and more meandering lyrics, and it just sounds like the songs aren't really going anywhere. And then the next song comes on and it's just like, wow, that's a cool riff, we haven't heard that in a while. Rush being really hard rocking and like close to metal even at times, like on Time in Motion or something like that. So my favorite song on here, I think, is Time in Motion. I just loved like the chugginess of it, the progginess of it. It's nice to hear them get back to a heavier sound like that. The best song, I think, is probably Driven. Another great song, great riffs. The lyrics flow pretty nicely, but it doesn't have quite as much of a pop to me as Time in Motion does. But it does kind of sum up the era, the sound that they were going for. And they do play it live more frequently than anything else from this album. And it's a great song. And I think the worst song on here has to be Dog Years. Another one where the lyrics just completely let it down. But also, musically, I don't think it's that good. Might actually be the only Rush song I completely dislike. It's tough to say for sure. But I usually just skip it when I'm listening to it because I just don't enjoy it. I listened through the whole thing on this discography review that I did, and it still is bad. Then obviously we have the sort of hiatus that Rush took when all of the tragedy in Neil Peart's life started happening, and no one knew at the time if they were going to get back together ever, or if the band was done. But then they did come back, and they came back with Vapour Trails, which I think was also a divisive album based on what I've read and the opinions I've seen from people. I know the Mix gets a lot of flack on this for being kind of the opposite problem of their 80s albums. Too much low end, too much muddiness, there's just sound everywhere, and it's really hard to pick out what each instrument is doing. That said, I think it works in this album's favor, personally. I have the remastered version as well, and I don't like it as much. I think this one, the character is lost in the remaster a little. I think the muddiness and the grunginess is part of the experience of this album, and the personal and tragic lyrics that are on this, dealing with all of Neil's hardships that he endured over the few years before this, that dark sound that it has aids in conveying those emotions. And re-listening to it, like, I've always enjoyed this album. I never quite got why people didn't like it so much, but it wasn't always one that I returned to often. So listening back to it again was a really great reminder of why I enjoyed it. I think there's a couple songs on here that maybe don't hold up too well. Some of the songs are maybe a little bit long for what they offer, a little bit too repetitive. I think it gets a bad rap, and I think there's a lot to love on this. The best song, to sum it up, is still One Little Victory, which is one that they continue to play live. And for good reason. I don't think it's one of the best songs on the album. There's a lot that I would pick over it, but it does convey lyrically the point of the whole album, the point where they are in their careers, not knowing if they were going to come back, and then coming back triumphantly, filling stadiums again. And it is very bombastic. It's very in your face, attention grabbing that way. Favorite song for me, though, has to go to, I think, the next track on the album, Ceiling Unlimited. One, again, I don't hear people talk about, but I think the chorus is very catchy. Some of Geddy's best bass playing on this album in general. But especially on this song. I just think at the end it goes on a little too long and gets a little repetitive. So if they had cut the last minute or so of the song and faded it out or just ended it, I think it would be a better song. But it's still a great song that I think is very slept on. Shout out to also The Stars Look Down, which I never paid that much attention to until this recent listen through. And it really grabbed my attention this time, and I was like, how did I not notice this song before? Vocally unique for Geddy, I think. I don't think they have much of a call and response thing like they do on that song in any other things they do. But then the worst song on here, I think, would be Sweet Miracle or Freeze. And I hate to include Freeze, being that it's part of the Fear, once trilogy, now quadrology, of songs that they had with The Weapon, Enemy Within, and Witch Hunt. What all are some of my favorite songs, and this one just doesn't really fit with the rest of them in terms of quality or memorability. But I think Sweet Miracle is the worst track on the album, just being unremarkable. I don't know. I found myself just wanting to skip it when I was listening through again because I wasn't enjoying it. I wouldn't say that I disliked it. The sound of it is still there. I like the production, the gloominess of it, and the playing is still excellent, but it doesn't hold my attention. Now, next up, I know this is not actually a original material studio album. It's an EP of covers, but it is technically album length, barely, and it has just a lot of very famous songs that inspired them growing up, that they played back in their early garage days. They wanted to revisit and do some sort of tribute recordings of, and it's a fun listen. It's different for them to be playing music like that, much less complicated, and I've always enjoyed it, so I figured I'd throw it in here, just honorary mention. I think the best song on here is 7 and 7 Is. It's a very unique song, and I actually have never heard the original one, so I should go listen to that one day. But I really enjoyed this version, at least. I think the worst song on here is For What It's Worth. It's a fun song, but the chorus is kind of annoying. I don't know. I don't have much to say about it. It's still enjoyable. And my favorite one, I think, is The Seeker. Obviously being originally by The Who. I have heard the original one, but I haven't had the opportunity to delve much into The Who's discography in depth, so I can't really say how it compares much. I haven't listened to it enough. But I do really like the rendition they do on here. And I prefer Geddy's voice to Roger Daltrey's voice. So that's a plus for it, in my opinion. And we're nearing the end now. We've got Snakes and Arrows. This album, I think, gets also sort of overshadowed by the sort of controversial aspect of Vapour Trails before it, and the much more universally acclaimed Clockwork Angels that comes later, which we'll talk about in a minute. But it's a really solid album that I've always liked, and I still liked a lot when I re-listened to it recently. There's a few moments of the lyrics still feeling kind of like wedged in there, or, you know, made to fit, where they could have maybe rewritten a few things. But on the whole, almost metal at times, but also kind of folkier than what they've done before. A lot of acoustic guitar, a lot of heavy riffs sort of combined. It's very interesting. And it's a good mix. It's a variety of songs. Best song on here is Workin' Them Angels. Another sort of carrying on the theme of Vapour Trails with, you know, the hardship, but it's more from the point of view of, you know, the things that have gone right in Neil's life and how he feels lucky in that he's you know, put his guardian angels through a lot, but they keep coming through for him. So it's an optimistic song in that way, after sort of the depression of the previous album. And then I think the worst song on here is probably Bravest Face, I think, for me. Also 3 instrumental tracks on this, which are all really good. And I was talking about some of the best songs that Geddy's ever played for bass specifically. And I think Malignant Narcissism is one of them. Incredible bass playing. Anyway, side. Bravest Face, I think, there's nothing wrong with it. It's just not memorable. And it falls into some of the traps that some of their previous albums did. It's just not up to their standard, I think. And then my favorite one on here is tough, because there's quite a few. But I think Faithless takes it for me. Not being religious myself, I can relate to the lyrics quite a bit. And I find a lot of honor in its message of, like, you don't need to be religious, you don't need to be under threat of eternal damnation or punishment to be a good person. And I think that's a great message that applies to everyone, whether you are religious or not. I don't think it's an offensive song to people who are religious. I think a reasonable person could still understand the intent behind it. But I really enjoy it, and it's just mellow and very catchy and kind of soothing to me in a way. Finally, coming to the end of this long video, we have Clockwork Angels, the last album that Rush did all the way back in 2012. I was in my last year of high school. I remember when Headlong Flight came out as the first single. I was just blown away. At that point, I still hadn't explored all of Rush yet, so just their usage of the bass guitar as the sort of lead instrument and the actual guitar doing a lot of the rhythm stuff and the sort of role reversal that the song starts with, I really enjoyed that. And this album, I think, is a huge return to form lyrically. There are still hints and moments of that less focused lyrical melodic direction, but on the whole, with this being a concept album, they return to their sort of roots of firstly playing heavier music. This is, I would consider this a progressive metal album personally. I know the lines are blurry, And I know some people have much more strict definitions than I do. But it's a very heavy record. There are some really great riffs and heavy moments on here. But they also return to their earlier roots of large concept storytelling, which has been pretty much absent for the last like 8 albums. So this is a story of a young boy who is, you know, from a small town, dreams of big things in sort of a steampunk-esque fantasy world. And he goes out and he has all these adventures. He has these great things. He has these terrible things happen to him. And it's all kind of a metaphor for Neil Peart's life and the way he lived and the tragedies that happened to him and the successes that happened to him, and how at the end of the day they all boil down to a life that you've lived fully, and that your material possessions and your success don't matter as much as the relationships that you've built and the respect that you've earned through your life. So it's a very hopeful album. It's a very comforting album, I think, while still being interesting musically, and the story keeps your attention. I've also read the book that accompanies it, which is a great book. I think anyone should read it if they haven't. So I think the quote-unquote objectively best song on here, to sum it up, has to be Headlong Flight. It was the single. It's, I think, the longest song, or second longest song on the album. Encapsulates the adventure feeling of the whole album, where like there's just a lot going on, and this protagonist is really living it up in both bad and good ways. And it's really heavy. It's got a lot of progginess in there, which again we haven't seen in a little while to that extent. And it's a great song. I think the worst song on here, to me, is probably the second last song, Wish Them Well. A little repetitive for my taste. Some of the songs on here are repetitive. A few of the choruses just kind of repeat a lot of things, which is a shame for me. I'm not a huge fan of repetition, but I think overall it compensates for that in other areas. But Wish Them Well is just a little underwhelming. It's still catchy. It still has its place in the story, but I think it kind of hits the same sentiment that the next song, The Garden, another favorite from many people, sort of seals the album with at the end. It doesn't feel super necessary narratively, and musically there's not much to write home about. So I think that takes my pick for the worst one. My personal favorite has to go to Halo Effect, which I haven't seen any specific dislike for this song. I think a lot of people do enjoy it, but I don't know if anyone would pick it as their favorite from the album. And it is a tough race, like BU2B, and Caravan and Headlong Flight, those are all excellent choices for me as well. But I think Halo Effect is just a really beautiful song. The strings that they have going on this album, which I didn't touch on, they have a whole orchestra playing with them on this record, which is very nice for their final release. Big sound, filling it all out. It really works to great effect on that song. The guitar playing is excellent and beautiful. The lyrics flow nicely. It does a really great job of conveying its part of the story. It's a lost love song, but in a way of like examining your preconceptions about someone, and the main character sort of realizing that he's put his romantic interest on a pedestal and sort of invented a personality for her that she doesn't necessarily have. And when that all comes crashing down, he's very introspective. He's like, oh, that was kind of a crappy thing to do. It's an interesting angle for a song like that. And it's kind of a message a lot of people would need to hear, especially younger people. So that really brings us to the end. That's everything Rush has put out so far. Obviously, we don't know what the future will bring, but maybe after these tours are done, they might consider, I know they've written some material, just kind of messing around over the years. Maybe we'll be lucky and we'll get another Rush album. But I think if we don't, Clockwork Angels is a hell of an album to end on. And they really sort of sealed their legacy. And it was a bit of a reputation reclaiming, I think, at the end of their career, after a bit of a rocky period through the 90s and the 2000s. If they never make another one, I think they ended, well, a huge bang. And I'm very excited to hear them play live when I see them in December. Thank you everyone for sticking with me through this very long video. If this is something people enjoy seeing, or if my takes are interesting, maybe I'll do other bands at some point. But it is tough finding time to sit down and just talk about stuff for so long. So who knows, this could just be a one-off. But yeah, let me know what you think. Let me know if you agree or disagree with my picks in the comments. I'm always happy to chat about Rush and argue over which is the best and which is the worst. So yeah, would love to hear from you all. Thanks. Have a good one.